A damaging, very impactful severe weather day is possible not only today but for the next 3 days straight. We have a very strong area of low pressure that's going to be moving across the northern plains, bringing a lot of moisture and energy up out ahead of it. Moisture levels will be through the roof across the northern plains. Look at all these purple colors, that's dew points in excess of 70 degrees. That is more than enough for some very strong thunderstorm development, and it's just going to make the air mass feel very, very humid. We also have some very strong upper level winds coming in. We have some jet streaks, these streaks of very fast moving air up in the atmosphere. A lot of that energy aloft will be translated down to the surface and result in widespread damaging winds, so the wind threat is especially elevated over the next few days. So we're tracking everything on the table from destructive wind gust segments, strong to even very strong tornadoes and very large hail over many of the same areas for a few days in a row. So this is not just a one-day deal, this is 3 back-to-back days of some very impactful storms possible. You'll want to make sure you're paying attention to these storms to stay safe out there. Today is Tuesday, June 9th, and today in the weather world I'll break down all the details as to what we can expect. So here is the culprit of all of our storms. It's this big bowling ball of low pressure over Canada and the northern US. You can see all these dark green colors that my mouse is circling over. As this area of low pressure crosses to the north, the contrast between the cooler air and all the heat and energy that's been compiling in the southern US, this is going to result in some pretty explosive storm development, especially when considering how strong our jet stream is and how much moisture we'll have in play. Today is where more impactful severe weather is possible over the northern plains, but really for a large swath of the central US. We're going to continue that threat of damaging winds again. So the third day in a row from North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, all the way into western Minnesota, as well as another sliver of Kansas into the panhandle of Oklahoma, you're under the 3 out of 5 enhanced risk of severe weather, which is pretty significant. This means that not just regular severe storms, but greater coverage and greater intensity of some of these storms are possible. So if you're in these areas, make sure you're hyper locked into the forecast. This is the type of weather you want to plan for because of how severe it might be. But even in the slight risk, some scattered severe storms are possible, as well as a broader marginal risk, some isolated severe storms are possible. It's not just a one-day deal though. We have 3 back-to-back enhanced risk days. Everything slides a little further to the east tomorrow, so Minneapolis into eastern Iowa, northern Illinois, including Chicago, and nearly the whole state of Wisconsin. You are in the enhanced risk of severe weather where damaging to even destructive winds and a few strong tornadoes are possible, with a slight risk expanding a little bit further outside of that enhanced risk. As we get closer tomorrow, we could see some upgrades in some of the probabilities here, so we'll be watching for that. But either way, make sure you have a plan in place in these locations for your day tomorrow for severe weather. And then as we go into Thursday is actually looking like potentially the most dangerous day of this outbreak to me. We have an enhanced risk of severe weather extending north of St. Louis to Chicago, Milwaukee, southern Wisconsin, so tracking a little bit to the southeast again from that threat on Wednesday. In particular, the tornado risk here is looking concerning. There could be a corridor of enhanced tornadoes somewhere in this region where a few stronger, maybe long track tornadoes are possible. Still a few more days out, so more uncertainty in the forecast in the next few days, but definitely this is a day I'd want to be paying attention to if you live in this region on Thursday. So that's the overview. Let's break down the threats a little bit more specifically for the next few days. Starting off today, the wind risk is really going to be the greatest concern, especially across the Dakotas and portions of the northern plains. I expect a few lines of storms to form, and in those lines we could get Boeing segments where easily we could get 70-80 mile per hour plus winds. Those are destructive wind gusts. These bring down power lines, cause trampolines, any objects in your backyard to go flying across the yard. So make sure we're tying down loose objects in the backyard, but also preparing for the possibility of power outages in this region, especially in the red and pink shades. That's where the higher confidence of damaging winds are. Make sure we have flashlights ready. The phones are charged before we go to bed tonight, just in case some of these destructive winds come through. The hail risk is pretty elevated, especially at first, and the tornado risk, especially in this yellow shade. This is kind of where the higher probabilities of a strong tornado is possible, but some of these hatch lines here that extends all the way down into Nebraska, in this corridor of black hatch lines, that's where an EF1 plus tornado could be possible, so a little bit on the stronger side. Tomorrow, the highest tornado potential will be just southeast of Minneapolis, including Waterloo, Cedar Rapids, and Iowa, and western Wisconsin. So in this yellow shade, this is where the highest chances of a stronger tornado is possible. And then a little bit further to the east and a little bit more widespread than the tornado risk is the damaging wind risk, which encompasses most of Wisconsin and includes the Chicago metro. So this is where once again we want to prepare not only for trampolines flying and stuff flying out the backyard, maybe some tree limbs snapping, but also for the power outage threat. That's a serious concern across this region tomorrow. Hail risk is present as well, especially a little bit further to the west. So we kind of have a multi-hazard severe weather concerned, where all the different hazards, wind, hail, tornadoes are possible. But that wind and the tornado risk are definitely my two top concerns, especially that wind threat. Don't underestimate it. Even if it's not a tornado, damaging winds from storms alone can cause a lot of damage. And I do think we'll have multiple intense segments of thunderstorms the next few days. So without further ado, let's time it out. Notice the time will be here on the top of your screen. Today's action will wait till after about 4 or 5 o'clock. This is when storms will start to be forming across the Dakotas. Now initially we're going to have a few discrete supercells here or there. This is where the hail risk is highest, and an isolated tornado could form here within some of these cells. Quickly though, the storms are going to evolve into a line. Our storm structure is set up where these cells will be bumping into each other to form one or more linear clusters of storms that move through the Dakotas. And even though the colors here aren't too intense, this right here could pack some very damaging winds. So North Dakota, South Dakota, this is 8 o'clock. This is when we're starting to deal with the potential for some damaging winds. Further south as well though, we have storms firing around that same region from Nebraska to Kansas. Any of these storms, some damaging winds and some large hail is possible. So if you're in these communities, this could potentially affect your rush hour home. Maybe leave a few hours early if you can to try to avoid some of the nastiest of the storms. It'll be moving through Bismarck in North Dakota, central South Dakota as we go 7, 8, 9, and then progressing to the eastern portions of the state past sunset. Something to watch for also is if we get any individual cell ahead of this main line, that's where a strong to potentially very strong tornado is possible. The main caveat here is there's a lot of uncertainty if we'll get any storm. Notice that HRRR model shows nothing developing ahead of the line, keeps all the convection to that main line, which would mean damaging winds is the biggest threat. But we just can't take any chances where if a stray storm manages to form, it could quickly explode into a long track tornado and move further east ahead of the main line. This is just something we want to be cautious for, even if we don't necessarily expect it to happen. This main line will continue marching to the east, so some destructive wind gusts possible in this across portions of the northern plains. If I zoom out a little bit further to the south though, even across Nebraska and Kansas, storms will be a little bit more scattered down here, so not as widespread as further to the north, but within any of these storms, large hail and damaging to even destructive wind gusts are possible. Storms cross into Minnesota past midnight, so the state of Minnesota, you'll be mostly clear until midnight, but it's in the early hours of Tuesday morning, that's when the storms come through. Minneapolis, you could be waking up to loud thunder, very gusty winds. And once again, the signal here, some of these storms look pretty intense for some of those damaging winds, so this is where the power outage threat and some tree limb snapping, all that stuff is kind of maximized here. So Wednesday's storm mode is kind of complex because it all depends on what will happen today and later on tonight, how exactly the storms tonight die out, how strong they'll be, where they're formed. These will all be factors into tomorrow's storm positioning. It does look like though we could have some morning to noontime storms across portions of Wisconsin, so the storm threat tomorrow won't wait until the evening like it has been the past few days. We could get a kickstart earlier on from some earlier storms and some outflow boundaries, kicking out some more energy. So something we're watching closely. We could have a round of storms moving into Iowa and Illinois as we get to 2 o'clock. Also some more storms in Canada, which could extend down into North Dakota and Minnesota. So this whole region, don't wait until the evening to be weather aware. Be keeping tabs on the weather throughout the day for some of these storms because it's kind of hard to predict exactly how the environment will play out. It's going to be pretty messy across this region. What we do know for sure is the main storm threat will be enhanced after about 4 o'clock across Wisconsin, Illinois, eastern Minnesota, and parts of Michigan. This is where that enhanced risk of severe weather lays, and notice the storms entering this region here. This is when I'm concerned for the greatest coverage and the strongest intensity of damaging winds and large hail. So this is when your power outage threat is greatest. This is when the tornado risk is greatest. Maybe a few stronger tornadoes in the mix, as well as some large hail. So definitely making sure we're staying weather aware during this time frame. Another consideration, just because the storms are messier, it's not one clear-cut line like it will be today. That means that some areas could see multiple rounds of severe storms. Notice how we kind of have a few complexes, this initial complex with some more storms behind, meaning once this first line of storms form, don't think you're in the clear just yet because there could be some additional ones behind. This could also increase the flooding risk a little bit with some multiple rounds of storms. So some damaging winds, large hail, a few tornadoes possible in this region. As we go later on into the evening, we could have some pretty nasty storms moving toward Milwaukee as we approach midnight, and the Chicago, you could get in on some of the action after midnight into the early hours of Thursday. I will say this far out, with how complex the environment is, this is just one model solution, so things can still change as we get closer, but this is just a general region where we're looking at multiple rounds of storms possible. Going into Thursday morning, the HRRR is trying to spin up another complex of storm to start the day. So 6, 7 a.m. we could be waking up to some nasty storms moving through Iowa and Minnesota. This is definitely lower confidence in this. I'd put more of a question mark, but the Thursday severe weather threat will definitely ramp up later on into the afternoon, and it'll be targeted further to the area southeast. This is the farthest that this model goes, so we can't see yet into Thursday, but I'll definitely have more updates in the next few days. Subscribe to the channel if you don't want to miss that. But Chicago, going down further towards St. Louis, this is a region where more significant storms are possible. So that's the general model of how this might play out. I do want to zoom in a little bit specifically on the tornado risk real quick. This right here is a significant tornado parameter. It shows not only how likely tornadoes are, but how strong potential tornadoes are. And some of these yellow colors, that's pretty significant. So we'll have our main line of storms moving through the Dakotas, but this is that environment that I was mentioning where if any storm forms ahead of the main line, it might not happen at all, but if a storm could form ahead of the main line, we could have the potential for a longer track strong tornado. So we want to be super vigilant for that possibility today. Now tomorrow for Wednesday, notice the tornado risk kind of spreads out and encompasses more of a general vicinity from Minnesota to Wisconsin and portions of Iowa. So as all those clusters of storms move through, any of them could produce a tornado, potentially briefly strong. So want to make sure we have our tornado safety precautions in place, especially between 4, 5, and 6. This is when a corridor of potentially enhanced tornado potential is possible from eastern Iowa into Illinois and southern Wisconsin. So if you live in this region, I would definitely be paying super close attention to the weather during this time frame. And then the model ends again before we can get too deep into Thursday. But Thursday, as I was saying at the top, could be potentially the strongest day of storms and maybe the most concerning tornado outlook a little further to the southeast, which we'll have more updates on in the next few days as we get closer. Now that's a lot to track, but believe it or not, severe weather does not end there. We have a 15% risk on your day 4, so this is Friday. Storms will be moving further to the east from the Ohio Valley into interior New England. We're going to have to watch out for the threat for some strong to severe storms across this area. And then even day 5 for Saturday, we have a smaller but still significant 15% risk of severe weather over portions of the Central Plains from Kansas, southeast Nebraska, Omaha, a small portion of Iowa and Missouri. These threats will definitely change and grow as we get closer in time and we get more confidence in the forecast, but just an early heads up in these regions for Friday across the Northeast, and then Saturday across the Central Plains, you're kind of the next target and focus after we get through the short term for some severe weather. So that's a lot with all the storms. Real quickly before we end the video, I do want to touch on the heat because that is also going to be significant. I have the temperatures on. I'm recording this at about 1 o'clock Central on Tuesday, and we already have temperatures into the 80s and 90s across a large portion of the country. So this is summer, it's getting hot, but notice all of these orangish boxes here across the central US, another part in Minnesota, as well as portions of Michigan. These are heat advisories, so this is where it's unusually hot, even for summer standards, and we need to be taking extra care and extra heat safety precautions for potentially dangerous heat. One of the reasons why we have potentially dangerous heat is not just the temperatures. Temperatures in the 90s we can usually handle, but it's a high humidity. All the storms, all that energy is resulting in very unusual high humidity and dew points, and that's resulting in the heat index, the feels like temperature, being driven up several degrees from the actual temperature. So heat indices widespread in the upper 90s to even 100 degrees across the Central Plains later today on Tuesday. And then over the next few days, very hot temperatures continue on Wednesday into Thursday. Notice we do have some cooler air as some of those storms move into the north. So this will provide some relief, and this will eventually push off to the southeast. Before that gets here though, ahead of it, some dangerous heat with those heat indices approaching or exceeding 100 degrees. So being our first heat wave of the season, we just want to spread the word that this doesn't catch people off guard, to drink plenty of water, stay hydrated, and take frequent breaks inside in the shade. So thanks for watching. A lot of weather updates, a lot of moving parts over the next few days, but if you're in any of the enhanced risk days, make sure you're paying attention to the forecast because some significant severe storms, especially that damaging wind threat and the strong tornado risk, is possible. I'll have another update as we get closer to the Thursday, Friday time frame. So if you don't want to miss any of that, subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you next time.